So there you go. So I hope you had a nice weekend. I hope you're staying cool out there. Yes, of course, we're in the midst of a bit of a heat wave. It's August in Houston. This is not really all that unusual, although yesterday we did hit the triple digits for the third consecutive day. We'll probably do it again today. But let's start off talking about what's been happening in the tropics. It occurred to me today that we got off to sort of a flurry of a start with, as I pointed out, four tropical systems all making landfall in the United States, including two hurricanes, Beryl hitting Texas and Debbie hitting an area from Florida all the way to the Carolinas and beyond, even caused some serious flooding in Pennsylvania. And then we have Ernesto as well, which is out there. But you may be wondering, like I was even wondering myself, I said, gosh, I had to look at the date on the calendar and say, okay, where are we in hurricane season? And where are we with regards to this extremely busy season that we're expecting, right? We're talking about having 20 or 21 or 25 named storms, and so far we've had 5. So this is where we are. When you take a look at hurricane climatology, so of course the dates are on the bottom here. Right now we're at August 19th at the time that this is being broadcast to you. And we're not at the peak of the season yet. In fact, far from it. In fact, when you look at the numbers here, today, historically, you would have approximately half the number of tropical storms or named storms than you would on September the 10th. So that's still 3 weeks away. And when you take a look at hurricanes, which is the darker red, today we would have that number. There have been 40 in history on today's date. But when you go to September 10th, there have been almost 60. So we're still at a point where we're only about half of the average number of storms that you would have on September 10th, which is the peak of hurricane season. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is it's not at all unusual that you would have an extremely busy season and have only 5 named storms through today's date. In fact, that's still a pretty busy start to the season, considering that, really we got a long way to go, especially as we head into September when the season really peaks and a lot of our most infamous hurricanes have happened in September, like the Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900 and Hurricane Ike and things like that. Rita happening in September. So we have a long way to go. So we are here and we have all this to go through. So what's happening out there right now? I did want to bring you the latest on this Ernesto, which has quietly been a pretty impressive storm. So, Ernesto made its way across the Caribbean Sea, and it brought a lot of wind and rain and kind of squally weather to places like Antigua and then the like St. Thomas and St. Croix, back over to Puerto Rico, and actually did cause some damage there. And then as it moved past Bermuda, which it did basically make a direct landfall on Bermuda, sent a lot of big waves toward the east coast of the U.S. Even though it didn't come anywhere really near the United States, it did bring some beach erosion and some really dangerous rip currents and things like that. Now it's accelerating. It's actually gotten a little bit stronger, 90-mile-per-hour winds as of the 10 a.m. advisory here on your Monday, and it's accelerating. So what happens is these things get caught up in the jet stream winds that we're going to actually talk about in more detail coming up here, that zip across like this. Those are the winds that you use as a tailwind, when you're flying from Houston to London or something like that. You get there much faster than it is coming back because you ride these steering currents and jet stream currents. And so that pushes it past really quickly into the North Atlantic. This island is the island of Newfoundland in Canada, Newfoundland, and that's the capital city of St. John's. And they'll actually get some pretty frequent visits from transitioning tropical systems that are going from warm weather to cold weather type systems. Now it's going to be moving across here to the North Atlantic Ocean. That is Ireland, and this is Great Britain. And even though the L stops here, that's just the last forecast coming from the Hurricane Center, the storm will continue, and it'll get a lot bigger, and it'll basically just be kind of a squally, windstorm for folks up there in the British Isles. So it's amazing, how far reaching the impacts can be from these types of systems. Now, I posed that question before, like, kind of where are all the hurricanes, where are all the tropical storms? Because we really don't have anything other than Ernesto. There's nothing happening out there now. And remember, this is expected to be an extremely busy season. So let's talk about what's happening, why we're in a little bit of a lull right now. We've had 5 named storms, 3 hurricanes. And right now, there's really nothing urgent across the Gulf or the Caribbean Sea. Everything's fine. Even farther out into the Atlantic, everything is fine. The only storm that we have going on right now is Ernesto, which I wanted to show you the satellite view of that one. I wanted to show this off to you because I love being able to show you the visible satellite. Can't usually show that in the morning because it's dark out. You need the sunlight to be able to show visible satellite. And it's just, I just wanted to share with you how, well, they're beautiful to look at. You know, these hurricanes are beautiful to look at as long as they're not hitting. And they have this extent of clouds and sort of area of influence that can cover over 1,000 miles, sometimes more than 1,000 miles. And that's what this one is doing right now. All right, elsewhere across the Atlantic Ocean, you know, there's nothing happening. There really isn't. This area down here is called the ITCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone. And it's sort of like similar to the equator. It moves to the north. It's sort of where the trade winds come together. So you have the trade winds up here in the northern hemisphere, and they meet up with the ones in the southern hemisphere, and where they converge, that's the Intertropical Convergence Zone. Now in the wintertime, this moves to the south, and in the summertime, it moves here to the north. So this is an area where you'll get tropical waves here moving off the west coast of Africa, but for right now, there's really nothing to be seen out there, mostly because we have had a lot of dust, and that dust has sort of tamped down what probably would have been a big flurry of tropical activity. This is a look at what are called sea surface temperature anomalies. So we're still in record territory as far as how warm the water is in the Atlantic. An anomaly means, you know, like unusually warm, unusually cold. Well, all these areas that are yellow and some of the orange, that's unusually warm water. And it's pretty much warm. It's like a bathtub all across the Atlantic Ocean. You know, kind of getting ready to just fire up should any good tropical waves get moving over it. And by the way, just something else to keep in mind. So we've already had Beryl that went in there. We already had Alberto and Chris that went in down there. And we already had Debbie that went in there. And actually, yeah, right in there. And the Gulf of Mexico has really recovered since then. By recovered, I mean the heat content has built back in. It is very, very warm. The water is like, it's there for the taking right now for any tropical system that wants to come in here. A lot of energy, between 87 and 90 degree water temperatures. In fact, here, just off the coastline of Louisiana, that's about 90 to 91 degrees. Even around here, near Galveston, 88 degrees. Out here in the central Gulf of Mexico, in this area where we call the loop current, 89 degrees. I mean, that's pretty serious. I mean, that just means that anything that makes it in there, if we were to have another type of storm like a Beryl or a Debbie or something like that that were to move in here, it could really gain steam really fast to become a very strong system very quickly. So those of us who live in the Houston-Galveston area need to make sure that we don't just write it off and say, oh, we already had our storm for the year, so we don't have to worry about it. Now, it's definitely not the case, not with sea surface temperatures like this. I want to talk a little bit about the dust. We've had a lot of dust over the Atlantic Ocean that's been suppressing the activity. Where does the dust come from? Why in the world does it end up out there in the Atlantic Ocean? What pushes it out there? Well, this is really interesting. So the way the ocean works is that in general, you're going to have the middle part of the ocean as raised up. It's called a gyre, G-Y-R-E, gyre. It's like a big rotating high. And so, like, for example, in the Atlantic Ocean, you have the Bermuda High, Central Atlantic Gyre. And it spins around in a clockwise manner. And then the same thing in the southern hemisphere, you're going to have one in the South Atlantic Ocean too. And because it's a mirror image of the northern hemisphere, it actually spins around in a counterclockwise manner. So what that does is it pulls up cold water from the Antarctic Ocean here to this part of the coastline of Africa. And then it pulls down warm water over here. And the same thing happens on the northern hemisphere end of things, is that here, the coastline of Africa here, like around Morocco and over to around Portugal in these spots, you have colder water getting pulled down. then over on the United States East Coast, you have warmer water getting pulled up. So there's this transfer, this circulation. What ends up happening right here is super interesting because you have the Sahara Desert, which is, you can imagine, extremely hot and one of the hottest places in the world. You have the Sahara Desert, you have like the Mojave Desert, you have the Arabian Desert, but these are the hottest places in the world. But the way this one is set up is because of the wind flow and the oceanography, the water flow here, the currents in the south part of the Atlantic Ocean, you end up with cooler water here. This is water that's in the 70s. It's like 75 to 77 degree water. Now here over the Sahara Desert, you end up with, it's 120 degrees, right? If not more than that. And then here in this area that some people refer to as like sub-Saharan Africa, I don't know, is it West Africa, so here it's hot and dry, here it becomes very hot and humid, and here it becomes cooler. So it's an unusual part of the world where you have cooler air, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, where you have cooler conditions that are south of hotter conditions. Let me show you what I mean. This might kind of straighten out what I'm talking about. The jet stream generally flows with cold air on its left and hot air on its right. So here in the United States, typically, especially in the wintertime, you're going to have hotter conditions to the south. Texas and Louisiana and Florida, hot. Then you go up to Minnesota, you go up to Canada, cold. The jet stream flows in between those two things. That's what really drives the jet stream. Cold to the north, hot to the south. Cold to the north, warm to the south. And then you end up with this jet stream that flows west to east across the United States. That's what drives our weather most of the year. Go up to the last graphic though. Well, now all of a sudden this is the reverse, which is very odd. And in fact, geographically, it's pretty unique in the world where you have this big hot area that's north of a larger cooler area in the Northern Hemisphere. The reason I'm pointing this out is that it's called the African Easterly Jet that forms right there. And so this will, if there are dust storms up here in the Sahara, which there very frequently are, there's tropical waves that come up like this. In the northern part of the tropical wave will kick up some of that Saharan dust, and it'll get carried here out into the Atlantic Ocean by this jet stream, which is called the African Easterly Jet, which is a really unique geographical feature, really unique meteorological feature. And so it gives us this unique circumstance of Saharan dust. In other words, the dust is not something that we talk about like in the Pacific Ocean, or we don't talk about dust really any other time of the year other than when we're talking about its control over the number of storms that form in the Atlantic Ocean. Because typically, when you get storms like that, by the way, I had to share this with you. You see anything? I mean, this is a forecast from NASA of the dust plume. Sure looks like an elephant to me, doesn't it? It really does. I don't know about you, but it sure looks like an elephant to me. In fact, he gave me the elephant's eye right there. But this is a look ahead at NASA's 48-hour forecast of a dust plume. And again, like I pointed out, you have this jet stream, that African Easterly Jet that comes off, takes a lot of this dust and just kind of pushes it out here into the Atlantic. So when you have a lot of dust present, it's pictured, think about it. It's Saharan, it's dry, and it is not conducive for tropical development because the air is less humid. And also, when you have this dust in the atmosphere, let's say this dust is 3, 4, 5 miles up in the atmosphere, 6 miles up in the atmosphere, that dust absorbs sunlight that's coming in and it warms the air above the ground, warms the air. Usually how thunderstorms get going is you're hot at the bottom and then the air rises like a hot air balloon. And if it's hotter than the surrounding air, like we do when we get pop-up thunderstorms in the afternoon, then boom, it keeps growing and it forms into a tall cumulonimbus cloud. If you warm the top part of the atmosphere, now all of a sudden by putting this dust there, this absorbing the sunlight, then when that hot air rises, it reaches a temperature inversion and it loses all of its momentum. It doesn't continue to rise. And so that suppresses the formation of tropical systems. And actually, when we get kind of hazy and smoky around here, it can suppress the formation of local thunderstorms too. But on the bigger scale here, it's definitely noticeable. So with that in mind, That's one of the reasons why we're having just a little bit of a slowdown in tropical activity. And in fact, even when we look at the extended forecast, we're not really seeing a whole lot coming up as far as any additional storms coming in. Did want to let you know that we've had a little bit of a round of a couple of areas of severe weather. One of them has been here across parts of the deep south, and another has been up there in parts of New England. So that's where we've kind of had the influence of this jet stream, which goes up and down, because this is where we're hotter and this is where we're cooler. So again, that's where that jet stream is flowing in between those two spots. All right, moving on now to something that you're going to see this hurricane season. We talked about it, Allison and I talked about it a little bit last week on Forecasting with Friends. A new forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center. Now, it's not noticeably that much different, but it does have some different information. And this stems from a problem that was observed over the last several years with multiple storms. One of the most noteworthy was Hurricane Ian last year, but for me, it goes all the way back to 2004 and Hurricane Charlie in Florida, which hit almost the same spot. And I think probably we can apply this to Hurricane Beryl here as well, because remember with Beryl, the effects of the winds were very far inland. And so if you were to just look at an old-fashioned graphic from the National Hurricane Center, what you would have seen would have been coastal watches and warnings. They would even go from one part of the coastline to the other. For example, the message would say, a hurricane warning is in effect from the Sabine Pass to Matagorda Bay, or something like that. They would highlight the coastline as being under a hurricane warning, and then you would have this cone that comes in, and you would have a red line on the coastline, and then everything else just shows the cone. And then maybe it was just not expressing the message well enough that there are a lot of inland hazards. And so this is the new information that just came out from the National Hurricane Center. It's their new center cone graphic, which is going to depict both the United States inland and coastal wind risks. So they're saying the new graphic helps to communicate risk from wind at both inland and coastal locations. The new experimental Hurricane Center cone graphic is available that predicts more of that. For example, here in Florida, much of the inside of the cone there is red, indicating that's where the hurricane warnings are. So the entire 5-day cone now is going to be colored white. Does that make a big difference? Not necessarily. Before, the default color is that I think it was white and then it turned gray or something, it's like faded out, but they're not doing that anymore for both the 3-day and the 5-day cone. Also notice here in this example, they don't have that line going down the middle, which I'm a big, I'm in opposition to the line when you're talking about a storm getting that close to the coastline. We don't want to focus in on the line anymore because, as we learned with Beryl, the impact to be very widespread. And being close to that line doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be in the clear, as far as being away from any risks from the storm. So anyway, you're going to notice this. This was just put into effect. It's sort of like an soft launch, I guess you could call it, because the Hurricane Center didn't start using it at the beginning of the season. They're doing it as a mid-season sort of experiment. Look, the government takes forever to do things. They don't just switch things. There's got to be a whole series of bureaucracy and red tape. Just to make this little change took years. So anyway, that's what you're going to be seeing coming up here. As far as is anything forming out there, let's take a look. So this is the GFS, which is our American computer model, and I'm going to walk you through the next week, the entire week. Yes, there are a couple of little, for example, so if we pause the action here on Saturday, this upcoming Saturday, it does look like there's a tropical wave out there. That one will have a slight chance of developing into maybe a tropical depression or a storm. We'll see. Right now, it's just computer model generated there, indicated. And then down here in the far southern part of the Caribbean Sea, down by Panama, might be a little area of low pressure developing down there. As far as what's happening here, closer to our part of the world in the Gulf of Mexico, right now, It looks like by Sunday, yeah, there might be a little spin down there, maybe. I mean, you're really grasping at straws here to find anything that looks, intense as far as forming any areas of low pressure. One thing I will tell you, though, is that as we head into our weekend, we could be looking at a little bit better chance for rain here, which will hopefully hold down our temperatures just a little bit. All right. So I'm back here on the other side of the room. See, I have all this mobility now since I have my new fancy microphone for $15 from Amazon. So over here, I'm just working on putting together the news at noon, and this mouse. Can I just tell you? I don't care what business you're in. I don't care if you work for, because I've visited enough schools to know, like the IT person at a school, if you're the IT person at any business, I don't care if it's the most technological business in the world, stuff always breaks. And right now, we cannot figure out why our mouse and keyboard is not working.
Like I was down on my hands and knees under this desk. Seriously, I'm down here. I was down there, digging under the desk.
The last thing I wanted to show you is this, and that is the August formation zones. Where do hurricanes form in the month of August? Well, they're in the exact areas that we were just looking. The exact areas that are covered by dust right now. So right here, central Atlantic Ocean, not so much off the coast of Africa, but as you get here into the central Atlantic, and then right here, the islands of the Caribbean, St. Lucia, Martinique, Virgin Islands, back over to this part of the world, and then off the East Coast where we currently have Ernesto, and then of course the Gulf of Mexico. So these are the formation zones in August. Now, once we get into September, we're going to notice that those formation zones can sometimes include areas a lot closer to the Cape Verde Islands there in the eastern parts of the Atlantic Ocean. So I want to thank you for joining me for Mondays with Mike. Mondays are so, I know I say this every Monday, they're so busy. It's so busy. I have Forecasting with Friends is our daily, I'm looking at the clock right now. Forecasting with Friends is our daily weather show that we have on Fox Local, which is our smart TV app. It is from 11 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Monday through Friday. Some days there are two of us here. We'd like to have two people here most days. So it's either JD and me, or Allison and me. And sometimes it's just her, sometimes it's just me, sometimes it's just JD. So today is going to be one of those days where it's just me. But we got some good stuff, including, and I would encourage you to go to YouTube and search John Dawson, meteorologist John Dawson, because he just did we love JD's hurricane gear tests, and he just did this one involving freeze-dried beef. Like, how they have astronaut food, like freeze-dried ice cream? No. Freeze-dried beef. We're going to see what it tastes like, because he and I are going to have to taste it here one day soon. Hey, thanks for tuning in for Mondays with Mike. Safe travels to, of course, I'll call them, but I just want you to know my mom and Neil are going to be doing some traveling late this week. So it looks like it's actually going to be maybe a little on the cool side up in Pennsylvania. So I will keep an eye on the weather for them. Sorry, guys, it's a little disjointed today. It's hard. Mondays are hard. But hope you learned something about that African easterly jet. It's amazing. I learned about it in college. I never forgot about it. I think it's the coolest thing. It's one of the most interesting geographic features in the world that allows for that jet to form. Pretty cool stuff. All right. See you next week, guys.